Now it is time to start learning how to make our own sounds and our own patches inside of the Massive. And I was surprised because of the hundreds of tutorials that I've looked up on the internet and on YouTube that nobody actually really explains the Massive well, or at all. They just tell you what knobs to tweak, and then you kind of are on your own to start tweaking your sound. So I'll do my best for you to try and explain it, although it's a little bit far-fetched. So before we go into the Massive, I have to explain you some things about normal sound design before we go into the Massive synthesizer. So let me make a new track here, MIDI track, and I'm going to drag in one of Live's instruments called the operator. Okay, you don't have to follow along with this. I'm just going to show you. Now, when I play a note on my keyboard, so let me insert a new MIDI clip here so you can see what I'm doing. If I press on the E here, it makes a pretty high noise. So if I go down on the keyboard, so say an E in the first, you see that it sounds a lot lower, and then in the zeros is really where a sub bass lies. And you can see that it is a lot lower there. So I'm going to use this note to shape my bass. Let me get rid of the MIDI clip again. I'm going to go back to the operator. And as you can hear, the sound is very round. Now, every sound that we hear is basically a waveform. So for example, if I zoom in on this, for example, this kick, and I'm going to zoom in really close, you can see that it's a bunch of waves. And these waves are very, very large compared with the tiny waves with the hats. Why? Because the hats is a very high sound, so the waves are faster, and the kick is a very low sound, so the waves are further spaced apart. And that's always why if you're far away from the party, you can hear it halfway across town, but only the bass, not the high tones, because bass travels further because the waves are bigger. Alright, so we need to know this because if we go back to our operator synth here, we can tell what kind of wave we want to produce. So in this case it's called a sine wave, and a sine is basically a sort of an up and down. Sine waves are also used in video games as a mathematical code to make the head bob up and down in, for example, a first person shooter. So that's what sine waves are. Alright, so and they sound like this. Now if I want to change this to a different wave, for example, I can choose a saw wave, and a saw wave is called saw because it just goes straight down and then it loops back again. So if the waveform is rendered out and we would zoom in on it, it would look like a sawtooth, and they sound a lot grittier like this. And that's also why a lot of times in dubstep people say, oh, this bass line is really dirty. Well, basically what they mean is there's a good saw wave in there, or a square wave, which is the next one that I'll explain. Squares basically go up and down, so they still have pretty of a sharp edge, but they sound not as gritty as the other one, but they sound like this. So since it adds some slight roundness, but not as much, it sounds very dirty or gritty, whatever you want to call it. Alright, and then we have our triangle wave, which is sort of a sine wave but sharper, so it will sound kind of round but also kind of gritty, and it sounds like this. So it's a little less soft than our sine wave. Now, when you're making a sub bass, you always want it to be a sine wave because it fits with almost everything. Of course there's exceptions, but that's what we'll do in this case. Now that we know all this, it's time to open up the Massive. So go back to our plugins, drag the Massive in there, and this is when you can start following along again. And there is 3 oscillators in here. Let me turn the third and second one off so that we can only hear the sound that the first one is producing. And it's producing sound in waves also, but the Massive does not show us what those waves are like, because it's kind of their secret. Instead of only making waveforms like the one that we just explained, it has a couple of them stacked up, and they call it a wave table because there's multiple stacked on top of each other like on a table. So what you can do is you can switch inside of that wave table to say where you want the sound to start when it starts producing it. So if you want to see what sounds we can pick, or what oscillators or waves we can pick, you can click this button down here and it shows you all of them. Now in this case we're at the square saw number 1, So this is basically, on the left we have a square wave, on the right we have a saw. So if we go all the way to the left, it sounds like a square, and if we go all the way to the right, it sounds like a saw. And of course in the middle it's merging both. Now that's very handy. In this case we're going to keep it to a square wave entirely, because that's what we'll do for sort of more of a gritty sub bass. Alright, and then we're going to turn the intensity all the way up, and then the amplifier we're going to turn it all the way up. And now then it wants us to pick what effect we want to route it into. Now Massive comes with two of its own effects, this one, and we can switch what effect we want. And we want to send all the sounds of the first oscillator to effect number 1. Alright, so it goes right into here. Now we can route it into there. We can select whatever one we want, and we want to go with a daft filter. And now it shows up a cutoff button. And cutoff is basically the same as what we've done with the auto filter in the previous videos, is we cut off certain highs and lows. So watch what happens when I tweak this one. As you can see, it cuts off the high tones as soon as I move it this way, and then only the bass is left over. And this is perfect for a sub bass. But our sub bass is too soft and by far not punchy enough, so we need to do some tweaking here.